On this Friday night, family ties. Fresh admissions about the links between the federal housing minister's office and a food marketing firm.
Did the minister know that they were sisters?
Allegations the Alberta Premier's office interfered in the justice system. The demands for an investigation. Copyright fight.
There's no recourse for me.
Protecting and preserving the intellectual property of Indigenous artists. And blind ambition.
I don't want to let a disability stop me.
Picture-perfect snapshots from the eyes of visually impaired photographers.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a follow-up to our reporting and some new details about a federal cabinet minister and some potentially questionable behavior in awarding government contracts. Housing Minister Ahmed Hussen stirred up controversy last year over revelations he awarded a $133,000 grant to a group whose senior consultant made anti-Semitic comments online. Fast forward to this week, he's facing questions for $93,000 worth of government contracts given to a food marketing agency with lackluster qualifications in politics. Mackenzie Gray joins us from Ottawa. And Mackenzie, you've learned of yet another personal relationship between the minister's office and someone at that agency?
Well, Neetu, the housing minister is in more hot water tonight after it turns out there is a close personal connection with the food-focused PR firm that he hired to do communications work for him.
Because if you start crying...
This is Tia Tariq, Ahmed Hussen's current policy director and a close advisor who's worked for him since at least 2017. Her sister is Hiba Tariq, the owner of Munchmore Media, which, as Global News first reported Thursday, received 14 different contracts between January 2021 and September 2022 to do PR work for Hussen's constituency office. The bill, over $93,000, which represents 14% of Hussen's entire constituency budget for that period. That means Tia was working for Hussen when her sister was getting paid. Prior to our first report, we asked the minister's office point blank, did Hussen have a personal relationship with anyone at Munchmore Media? His office didn't address the question. It wasn't until late Thursday night when Global News approached his office once again that they admitted to the connection.
The minister's director of policy is Miss Tia Tariq, and she does have a connection to Miss Hiba Tariq, and that connection is they are sisters.
Did the minister know that they were sisters?
Yes.
Hussen's defense, they spoke to the ethics commissioner, and Mario Dion cleared Hussen to hire his policy director's sister. Munchmore Media normally works with chefs and food bloggers, and they claim to know the upcoming food industry trends. But that focus didn't stop another cabinet minister from also hiring them. Women and Gender Equality Minister Marcy Ian used constituency funds to bring on Hiba Tariq in March and July of 2021, paying her a total of $10,000.
We have Liberal ministers who are lining up insiders to get access to these sweetheart contracts that everyday Canadians would only be too happy to have access to.
Ian's press secretary says the minister didn't know about the relationship between Hussen's office and Munchmore Media before she hired the PR firm that specializes in the food industry. But with those two additional contracts, Neetu, it brings the total amount the company was able to earn from Liberal cabinet ministers to over $103,000.
And Mackenzie, you mentioned Hussen's office says they were cleared by the ethics commissioner. Did the ethics commissioner confirm he spoke to Hussen?
No, they didn't, Neetu. The office rarely confirms any private conversation the commissioner has with MPs or staff for that matter. But that office did confirm that conflict of interest rules apply at the constituency level, which means we could see opposition parties write to the commissioner to try and get him to probe the issue further. And we've also heard from a number of frustrated Liberals who are quite upset with Hussen. MPs and staffers have been reaching out to us all day saying that Hussen should have known this was inappropriate to give a contract to a longtime staffer's sister.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mackenzie. Another politician facing criticism tonight, Alberta's Premier. New allegations have surfaced that a member of her staff tried to influence Crown prosecutors. The allegations came to light in a CBC News report which claimed someone from Danielle Smith's office sent a series of emails challenging Crown prosecutors' assessment of cases stemming from the Coutts border blockade in early 2022. Smith denies any knowledge of emails, but as Heather Yurex-West explains, this isn't the first allegation of political interference around COVID-19 charges involving Alberta's premier.
For 18 days in the blistering cold last winter, protesters occupied part of the highway near the Canada-US border at Coutts, Alberta. They were angry about COVID-19 measures, and according to Crown prosecutors, some of those involved broke the law. 4 people were charged with conspiracy to murder police officers, 13 with weapons offenses, and 3 people accused of organizing the protests were charged with mischief.
I've asked them to consider all charges under the lens of, is it in the public interest to pursue? And is there a reasonable likelihood of conviction?
In a series of interviews and media appearances since mid-December, Alberta's premier said she spoke to prosecutors about whether criminal cases related to COVID restrictions should proceed. Comments that set off a firestorm of criticism.
Then a clarification comes out and says, no, she never called Crown prosecutors. That would be wrong. No one would ever do that. But I did speak to the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General.
But according to reporting by CBC that Global News has not been able to independently verify, a staff member within the Premier's office sent a series of emails to the Alberta Crown Prosecution Service last fall, challenging its assessment and direction of the cases stemming from the Coutts border blockades.
She certainly was sympathetic to the protesters at Coutts, so it's not surprising that she and the people around her would be interested in what was happening to those prosecutions.
In a statement, the Premier's office denied any knowledge of the emails, calling the allegations serious if true, warranting appropriate action. Alberta's opposition NDP renewed calls for an independent investigation.
Failing to do so and allowing this chaos to stand will cause profound damage to the rule of law in Alberta.
An Alberta Crown Prosecution Service spokesperson says they have no recollection of receiving emails from the Premier's office. Last week, a mischief and weapons charge against one of the accused in the Coutts border blockade was withdrawn by the Crown. Heather Urex West, Global News, Calgary.
An investigation into what led to a police shootout with suspects at a bank in British Columbia last year revealed some chilling details. Police say the twin brothers from Vancouver Island acted alone, had an arsenal of weapons, and were motivated by a hatred for police. It was a brazen daylight attack. 6 officers were shot. All survived, but 5 are still off work. Paul Johnson was at today's briefing as the findings of the investigation were made public. Paul?
Nitu, police believe that this was the vision of 2 isolated loners who hated police, hated government, and for years had been planning to carry out some kind of major attack where they would kill as many police as possible and would die in the process. Police believe the 22-year-old twins Isaac and Matthew Ochterlony not only carried out the attack by themselves, but for years had been planning and stockpiling their arsenal also by themselves. The weapons they used and the ammo was all acquired legally, though they did make some illegal modifications to their rifles, which were SKS semi-automatics, very common in Canada. Police believe they chose this bank in Saanich randomly, with the purpose not of stealing any money, but using the holdout to draw police into a shootout. Fortunately for the police and all of the innocent people who were involved, a SWAT team had been deployed nearby to a completely unrelated incident when this happened. So when the Ochterlonys got their shootout with police, it was with heavily armed officers trained just for a situation like this.
This is an event that we will never forget. That said, it is important how we choose to remember June 28th, 2022. At Saanich, we are encouraging our officers and staff to remember this day as one that innocent lives were protected and saved by police officers.
We also learned a little bit more about the Ochterlonys. Apparently they had been living with their mother. They both worked at the same job in light manufacturing, and police believe they'd actually been planning this attack for 2023, but decided they had to move it up to last June because they were forced to move house, and they were worried that in the process of moving, somebody might discover this arsenal that they've been building up and call police. Neetu, back to you.
Paul Johnson in Saanich, BC. Thanks, Paul. The federal government is hoping to capitalize on Canada's vast geography and space expertise to become a global player in commercial space launches. It's fired up a plan to authorize satellite launches within the next 3 years. As Eric Sorensen reports, it's a new frontier that will bring Canada's work in space full circle.
Canada has put astronauts in space, satellites in space, some of the highest technological advances in space. What it has not done is this.
And liftoff.
Canada has never been home to launching rockets into space, and that's going to change.
We have a strong space ecosystem here in Canada, and this was one of the missing links.
Ottawa is going to bring in regulations to launch spacecraft from Canada, including interim approvals to get the commercial industry off the ground quickly.
This is an important piece for us to have an end-to-end space sector. We're now going to be able to launch commercially here in Canada, which is going to play such an important role.
Near Canso, Nova Scotia on the east coast, Maritime Launch Services is already in early development of a spaceport just outside of town. The company hopes to launch a small suborbital craft this year and have a full facility to launch scores of satellites within 3 years.
We want to launch 8 or 10 times a year and be able to put 5 tons into orbit. So we can put 25 or 30 OneWeb satellites on one mission at a time. That's where the market share is. That's where the market need is right now.
Canada is a vast potential launch pad into space. For safety and technical reasons, spacecraft from Cape Canaveral only launch in easterly directions over the Atlantic. Canso, Nova Scotia is at a different latitude and could launch more southerly routes, also safely over the ocean. One or more spaceports in Canada would offer commercial launch sites and new orbital pathways for satellites above the Earth.
We can offer a lot of high inclination orbits, which is very much in demand for Earth observation and other specific applications. So it's an ideal country from that point of view.
Eventually, astronauts may fly from Canada, but the priority now is the satellite business.
It means we're open for business. So we've got tremendous capabilities in robotics, construction, design, engineering.
And coming soon, the final Canadian link in that chain, transportation into space.
We always felt like we were part of the space world, space community. This is maybe like the last feather in our cap.
Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
To the war in Ukraine, no deal was made today at defense talks focusing on whether to send German-made tanks to Ukraine. Germany is facing intense pressure from allies to send Leopard 2 tanks. Many countries own them, but Germany has veto power over any tank exports and appears reluctant to authorize delivery unless the U.S. does the same. Ukraine's president says his troops need more help now. A reality check on sustainability. Coming up, why Canada's shift to electric vehicles is easier said than done. The Prime Minister traveled across the country this week visiting electric vehicle plants as part of the Liberals' push to make Canada a major EV player. The government wants 20% of all new vehicles purchased in Canada to be electric by 2026. But as Taria Isri reports, some urban planners say this transition may not be as green as we think.
This red Tesla is the only electric vehicle on the block. But if Canada's plan to accelerate the EV revolution goes ahead, there will be many more.
It's a beautiful day today.
Raymond Lurie was an early convert to the sleeker, silent alternative, buying his first 10 years ago.
I wanted to have a zero-emission vehicle, and so I jumped on the bandwagon very early.
The federal government has also jumped on the bandwagon in a big way. Ottawa wants 1/5 of new vehicles to be electric by 2026. The target is 60% by 2030 and 100% in 2035, meaning all vehicles sold in Canada will run on electricity in less than a decade to get fossil fuels off the road.
It takes time to ramp up in terms of charging infrastructure, manufacturing capability, getting battery factories built.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spent the week touring these manufacturing plants.
We need to make sure we're building up a world-leading ecosystem in North America.
He stopped by a lithium mine project.
There's a real heaviness to it, yeah.
A key ingredient in EV batteries.
The carbon emitted from producing an electric vehicle
is significantly higher than emitted from producing an internal combustion vehicle. And that has to do with battery manufacturing.
Waste management experts say those emissions are offset over time. But there are other concerns. EVs are not cheap, and for people who live in apartments without charging stations, powering them up may not be easy or even possible.
Electric vehicles are kind of talked about in Canada as the final step, whereas in Europe they're very much talked about as a stepping stone
To save the planet, urban planner Jason Slaughter believes more Canadians need to go car-free entirely.
If you can get even a tiny fraction of the number of people who are currently driving onto other modes of transit, like walking, cycling, or public transit, then you can offset huge numbers of electric cars. I mean, it's so much better.
Lurie also wants more public transit, but says it's not a reliable way to get around his neighborhood and so many others in Canada.
And if you look at the climate crisis, it's we've got to do stuff short term.
And in the short term, Lurie and the government are betting on the EV boom. Taria Isri, Global News, Ottawa.
Ahead, the push to protect Indigenous intellectual property. The protection of Indigenous language, stories, songs, poems, and other forms of cultural expression has been front and center this week at a national conference. A First Nations artist in BC says it took a cease and desist order for an offshore company to stop using her work without permission. She helps explain why the issue goes beyond copyright infringement.
My English name is Luann Neal, and I'm from the Mamalilakla and the Kwakiutl people.
From wood carvings and painted works to textiles and jewelry, Luann Neal has been creating original designs for more than 30 years.
Our visual arts are directly connected to dance and music and spirituality and our cultural practices.
She says for Indigenous artists like her who create commercially, significant training around cultural protocols and family connections passed down through generations is required.
These are part and parcel of all of our histories right back to our origins.
Which is why it's such a blow when their work is exploited. Neal says these two designs of hers were taken by an offshore company last year with her name removed and sold on T-shirts, only taken down weeks later after multiple requests and a cease and desist letter.
There's no recourse for me. It would cost me more money to hire a lawyer to sue them than it would for any returns I'd get back from that.
Neal has long been advocating for organizations in Canada which specifically support Indigenous artists. She spoke at a national gathering this week focused on data sovereignty, hosted by the Office of Special Interlocutor Kimberly Murray.
Indigenous data, Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous stories, songs, lands, waters, practices have been collected for inappropriate purposes.
In the case of St'alis Nation, about 100 kilometers east of Vancouver, one of the most important symbols looked upon for generations as having spirit power has been widely appropriated.
The Sasquatch means so much to us as a people.
A story they say was stolen by a government agent in the 1920s and has been misused ever since.
The Sasquatch is even our logo, and that's how dear he is to our heart.
We're really proud of who we are. We're proud of where we come from. We're proud of what we belong to. And we always want to take care of all of that.
First Nations, Inuit, and Métis cultures have been appropriated by sports teams, fashion designers, companies, and governments for decades.
Those calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission were not calls to action just for businesses, for media, for lawyers, for education. It was calls to action each and every one of Canadians.
We're the ones who invented it. It belongs to us.
And some of those working to retell their misused stories are highlighting the role every Canadian plays in doing that work. Next, the UK Photography Club with a unique vision. A photography club in England is capturing the beauty of the world through a unique lens. Its members are all visually impaired, but as Crystal Gamansing reports, their talent is crystal clear.
Gosport offers photographers a bit of everything: history, scenery, and nature.
I've set my camera up this time to take pictures of seagulls, so when I see one, I'm all ready to go.
You can snap, so you got it all good to go. From birth, Andrew Fletcher has been blind in his right eye and has limited vision in his left.
Whenever I pick up a camera, I always have to photograph a bird because I enjoy the challenge of trying to follow a bird in flight. Don't have it always bang straight in the middle.
Dave Taylor formed the Below 2020 Media Club, a charity-supported group. The name is a nod to their visual impairments. Taylor loves helping others take pictures as much as he loves snapping them himself.
And that was sort of through the trees and the sunlight and the shadows.
Sue Robb has retinitis pigmentosa and says the little up-close vision she has left will eventually be lost. At the library in Ferrum, the club's work is getting a lot of attention.
Oh, well done, yeah.
I feel quite proud and a sense of achievement.
For the show, the photographers were tasked with picking 2 photos to display. While this is England, Canada is featured, specifically Canmore.
This one in particular got me because the bench, I can see myself sitting there with a flask of coffee, cheese sandwich, and just looking out there and just taking in what's going on. I've called it peace and tranquility.
Creating something and sharing it with the world takes courage.
I find it as a bit of a challenge, and I don't want to let a disability stop me.
I feel like my eyesight is given to me again, like I'm born again and take pictures so I can see the world in a different way.
Elena Summers radiates life when talking about photography. The power of the lens is clear and the club hopes to do more, but it comes down to funding. And while the snaps are limitless, the dollars aren't. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, Gosport, England.
And one of those images is tonight's Your Canada. Dave Taylor took this shot near Canmore, Alberta. That's Global National for this Friday night. Thanks for watching.